Medieval towns were bustling places filled with merchants, craftsmen, livestock, and residents living in tightly packed neighborhoods. With so much life crammed into small areas, an unavoidable question emerges. What happened to all the waste these people produced? Was trash neatly managed and organized, or was it dumped on the nearest street corner? Could the answers challenge how we think about cleanliness and urban life in the Middle Ages? The evidence suggests surprising truths, and mysteries remain about how societies wrestled with one of the most basic human problems: what to do with garbage. To understand the problem of trash, it's important to imagine the medieval setting itself. During the Middle Ages, from roughly the 5th through the 15th century AD, towns and cities across Europe grew around markets, trade routes, and centers of power. Streets were narrow and unpaved, homes pressed close together, and animals often shared space with people. There were no sewers in the modern sense, no organized garbage collection services, and no plastic packaging to stuff into bins. What people threw away was more organic, but that did not mean it was harmless or easy to handle. The most common types of trash in medieval towns came from daily living: food scraps and animal bones piled up after meals, ashes and soot built up from constant fires used for heating and cooking, animal dung from horses, pigs, and dogs collected in streets that often doubled as thoroughfares and dumping grounds. Human waste was ever present, whether in chamber pots or cesspits dug beneath homes. Broken pottery, worn-out shoes, and scraps of cloth added to the debris. While this waste was different from heavily industrial garbage seen in modern cities, it was still overwhelming when hundreds or thousands of people lived in close quarters. One of the most direct ways people disposed of trash was simply tossing it into the street. With no formal collection services, residents opened doors and windows and threw waste into alleys or onto roads. Over time, refuse accumulated on walking paths, which turned into foul-smelling, muddy lanes, especially after rain. Historical records from cities like London and Paris describe authorities repeatedly issuing decrees to stop people from throwing waste into public spaces. Yet the problem persisted, showing how difficult it was to regulate behavior in crowded towns without strong waste systems in place. A more deliberate method of waste management involved cesspits and privies. Many homes in medieval towns had pits dug beneath them, or just outside, where chamber pots were emptied and waste collected. These underground vaults served as early toilets, but they required regular emptying. Skilled workers, sometimes known as gong farmers, were hired to dig out human waste and transport it away, often at night. Archaeologists who study medieval cesspits find layers of waste, broken pottery, seeds, and bones that reveal not only how people disposed of trash, but also what foods they ate and what materials they used in daily life. One fascinating aspect of medieval trash is how little of it was truly wasted. In societies where resources were precious, people reused, repurposed, or recycled much of what they could. Cloth and wool were patched, repaired, and eventually shredded into rags. Broken ceramics could be ground down and reused as building material. Metal scraps were melted and reforged into tools or weapons. Animal bones might be carved into objects or burned for fuel. Even food scraps were not always discarded immediately. They fed pigs or were reduced into compost for gardens. Recycling in the Middle Ages was less a conscious environmental act and more a necessity born of scarcity. In addition to street dumping and cesspits, many towns designated areas for larger rubbish heaps. These were often placed outside the walls of the city or on unused land within its limits. Evidence from archaeological digs shows massive layers of compacted trash filling abandoned ditches, forming artificial mounds. Over time, these refuse piles sometimes became sources of valuable landfill. In certain towns, excavated rubbish heaps help historians today understand patterns of disease, diet, and material culture, since household waste became an accidental time capsule of everyday life. Town leaders recognized that overwhelming trash led to disease, stench, and poor quality of life. City ordinances across Europe from the 13th and 14th centuries reveal repeated attempts to control garbage. In London, laws fined residents who threw waste into the Thames River. In Paris, efforts were made to regulate butchers who dumped animal remains in open streets, contributing to infestations. Some cities established designated collectors who carted refuse to pits or outside boundaries, though these systems were inconsistent. The persistence of new decrees suggests regulation often failed, but the attempts themselves show an early awareness of public health concerns tied to sanitation. The link between trash and public health became painfully clear during outbreaks of disease. Filthy streets, animal dung, and polluted water created breeding grounds for rats and insects. Historians today believe these conditions worsened epidemics, especially the spread of the Black Death in the 14th century. People of the time did not understand bacteria or viruses, but they associated foul smells, or miasmas, with sickness. As a result, some towns tried stricter waste control during plagues, although their efforts were limited by lack of scientific knowledge and practical infrastructure. Modern archaeologists gain much of their knowledge about medieval trash from what survives in the soil today. Layers of broken pottery, charred wood, discarded bones, and filled cesspits give researchers detailed evidence of diets, crafts, and trade. Seeds preserved in cesspits reveal what fruits or vegetables were eaten centuries ago. Bones discarded by butchers show which animals were commonly consumed. Jewelry or coins lost in piles of rubbish provide insights into wealth and commerce. What may have seemed useless at the time has become invaluable to the study of medieval daily life. Medieval European towns were not unique in their struggles with waste, and comparing them with other regions highlights both similarities and differences. In the Islamic world, cities like Baghdad and Cordoba developed more sophisticated systems for water and sewage management, leaving Europeans seeming less advanced in contrast. Meanwhile, in rural villages almost everywhere, trash was less concentrated, spread across fields, and more easily absorbed by the land. The sharpest challenges came in large towns, where urban density magnified every problem. Trash in medieval towns was more than an inconvenience. It was a defining element of urban life, shaping health, laws, and even archaeology centuries later. People dumped waste in streets, filled cesspits, reused materials, and created rubbish heaps that grew alongside their communities. Authorities struggled to control the problem, but persistent garbage reminds us of the limits of medieval infrastructure. Today, what remains of that trash provides some of the richest sources for understanding how ordinary people lived. It is a reminder that the daily act of discarding waste, often unnoticed in the moment, can endure for centuries as a lasting record of human history.